Welcome to the first F1 fantasy video on this channel. This is going to be a chip strategy and tutorial guide for new players, and this should assist you with all of your needs and your queries. We're heading into Miami, the first time that Formula One will be racing there. That should be very exciting. It should be quite a new experience. We just had Imola, a classic track, in race week 4. I'll talk about that in my team selection video, where I'll also talk about my actual changes and my plans and the transfers I've made. What you're seeing here is my third team, so I won't be revealing my first and second teams until that very video. But what I'm going to do here is go through all the rules, talk about all the essentials, the price rises, the chips, the best time to use them, and what I've learned from using the Mega Driver myself. I'll be covering all of that good stuff in this very video, so let's get straight into it. Before I go into the rules and simplify them, I want to talk about a few tips and tricks that I think are very beneficial for everyone watching. So let's talk about the constructor first. I think you want to narrow this down and don't overcomplicate it. A lot of people started this season with Mercedes, and to be fair, a lot of us thought it would be them and Ferrari challenging, but right now they look like the third or fourth best constructor at best, and it's Red Bull and Ferrari at the very front of the pack. Ferrari just simply offer very good value. They started the season at around 18 million, I believe, which is an absolute bargain considering the fact that they're probably the best car at the moment, if not the second best, and they have been the most reliable package over the first 4 races so far in the season. Red Bull had their issues, at least in the first 3 race weeks. Then they seemed to get their act together in Imola, and they completely dominated the race weekend. But ultimately, I would go for Ferrari as my first choice. And if you want to go a bit different, or maybe in your second or third team spice things up a little bit, I would consider Red Bull and McLaren. But in terms of all the other constructors, I just don't think they're worth it. And Mercedes are far too expensive for them to really be worth an investment. Over the years gone by, of course, they were the constructor to go to. They dominate every single championship. And I'd probably rank Red Bull a little bit higher up than McLaren, because although McLaren have gotten their act together after Bahrain, they still could be subject to some poor performances depending on the racetrack. But of course, they are probably one of the best teams out there. However, why not go for Ferrari when they're probably the best, and Carlos Sainz isn't going to have bad luck every single week. Now, looking at the drivers, I think this is also going to be kind of a topic for debate. So I would go for a Red Bull driver if possible, and I think Perez just offers really good value at the moment. Verstappen, of course, is ideal, but remember, you cannot captain or turbo drive someone who costs over 20 million. So hopefully Leclerc doesn't go over that price very soon, because otherwise we're probably going to be looking to the likes of Perez or maybe Carlos Sainz for the captaincy or the turbo drive. So that will be a bit different there. But Perez is still a really good option, actually. And I would go for him or Verstappen. I think both of them offer really good value, although Perez arguably offers even better. Despite being a second driver, I think typically you'd look at it and say, you want to go for the first driver every single time. But sometimes you have these second drivers that actually do a really good job. And Perez, this season, I think he's got a better feel and grip of the car. And last season he was struggling, especially in qualifying, but that hasn't been the case this time round. And as you can see, he has a blue flame. And what does that mean? It means he has a streak coming up for qualifying. So if it's blue, it means qualifying. And if it's orange, like you can see with George Russell, then that means it's for the race. And Russell's the only driver to finish in the top 5 in every single race weekend this season. And obviously Leclerc would have done the same thing if he hadn't made that mistake in Imola. But as you can see, I would do something like that. Go for Perez or Verstappen. And I think Perez offers better value for money, and therefore he would be my pick. I would also go for Leclerc. I think that's a very simple one. You could also go for Sainz and double up on Ferrari, but because you have the constructor already, that isn't as essential, and either way you cover all bases that way. Then you could go for someone like George Russell. I just don't think Hamilton is worth it right now. Russell's almost got double the amount of points as his teammate, and Russell is consistently finishing in good positions, and even if he qualifies poorly, like he did in the Imola sprint race, he can still get back up because the car does have decent race pace, and I think Russell is probably one of the best drivers over 20 million, probably the best actually, even over the likes of Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. Now that is of course subject to debate. Verstappen's going to win more races than Russell, get more podiums and all of that good stuff, but you also have to remember that when you have a driver that's over 20 million, you cannot captain them unless you're playing the mega driver, and that's where Verstappen can come in very useful. So to kind of break it down very simply, and we'll talk about this more when we get to the rules section, if you're planning on using the mega driver, I think the best way to do it is to get Verstappen into your team, use your free transfers that are obviously for free, any additional ones would cost a -10 hit. That's when you want to go about things this way. I think you'd want to either mega drive Leclerc or Max Verstappen. I ultimately made the mistake with my first team heading into, I think, race week 3 in Australia. I actually mega drived Leclerc, and that worked out very well. I think he got 49 points in terms of base points, but my turbo driver was Carlos Sainz, and he got -10 in the end. Now, of course, that was a bit unlucky. It looked like Ferrari would dominate that race weekend. Verstappen actually didn't finish the race due to reliability issues as well. So ultimately, things can always go one way or the other, and Sainz has been very unlucky in the last 2 race weeks. However, I made the same mistake with one of my other teams, where I did the exact same thing: Mega Drive Leclerc, Turbo Drive Carlos Sainz in Imola, and of course Sainz didn't finish that race either. So I would rather go for Verstappen and Leclerc, either way you want, when you're using your Mega Driver. But one really crucial part towards using these chips and also making your transfers is looking at FP1, FP2 and also FP3 before the qualifying starts. That gives you as much information as possible to make the most informed decisions and also see which cars and which drivers are more acclimatized to a certain track. Now, in terms of a sprint race, you won't have that same luxury because you only get 1 practice session as opposed to 3 before the qualifying begins, because the qualifying would then be on a Friday, then you have the sprint race on the Saturday, and then you have the final race on the Sunday. So a pretty grueling weekend when it comes to the sprint races. They aren't too common, of course. Imola was the first one. We're going to have a few more across the rest of the season, but that's just the way it goes. And ultimately, in terms of assembling your team, I would go for something like this that you see on screen. I'd go for Ferrari as your constructor. I'd definitely go for Leclerc. He offers the best value for money of any driver in the game, and he's right now the best captaincy option. I keep saying captaincy. It's kind of an FPL and UCL fantasy trademark and buzzword, you can say. But I would go for Leclerc. And then I'd go for Sergio Perez, and possibly if you want to go for one of the more expensive drivers, I would go for Verstappen or Russell. But I definitely wouldn't go for Perez and Verstappen unless you have the means and you have the funds, but it's very difficult to then fit in Ferrari and Leclerc into the same team. When you're looking at more budget options, the ones that offer consistency and very good value, I would go for someone like Valtteri Bottas. I actually made the mistake of getting rid of him in my normal team ahead of the Imola race, and he finished 5th. Obviously, fair play to him. He's been great ever since leaving Mercedes, but I think he's one of the best around that price. And then you have Magnussen. I actually got rid of him, I think, ahead of Australia when Haas weren't looking too good, and I got in Esteban Ocon, and I was actually quite happy with that move. But then looking at FP1, heading into Imola, I really like the look of Magnussen and Haas, and therefore I brought him back into my normal team. So that's why practice sessions are very crucial. And in terms of the kind of budget-friendly options, I think Magnussen and Bottas are by far the best right now. When you're looking at middle of the road, between 10 and 16 million, I would think that Lando Norris is probably the best of the lot right now. He is showing some consistency, 2 podiums in a row, and he is far outperforming Ricciardo. And whenever a driver outperforms their teammate, they get points for that as well. And ultimately, a team structure like this, what you see on screen, is the way to go. But now I'm going to go into the rules section and also all of the stuff in terms of the chips and all the points, the substitutions, aka the transfers. And let's get straight into this now. If you are new to F1 Fantasy, I'd highly recommend going through the game rules. I did this vigorously when I first started off the game, and it's helped me a lot to learn some things. And I was actually very confused about certain aspects, and I'll tell you right now, like I talked about in the beginning of the video, one of the things that I was mainly questioning, which isn't really addressed here, is do all 3 of my teams count towards the overall leaderboards? Once again, the answer is no. They only count towards mini leagues, especially the ones I think that have specific settings where all 3 teams can count. So if your second or third team is outperforming your first one, that will rank higher in the leaderboards of a mini league, but not necessarily in terms of your overall rank. So I'm going to read through this. I'm going to try skim through it because I don't want to just repeat it word for word. I want to actually highlight the key information and say what is actually important in what is in this document. So in terms of the teams, you have an initial 100 million budget. And of course, those of you who started from race week 1, like myself, you will benefit more from this because you would have gotten in the likes of Verstappen or Leclerc, Lando Norris, those that may have gone up in price, and especially in the case of Leclerc, who's been a great asset this season. And that will help you in terms of building your team budget, and that is very crucial. You can of course pick 5 drivers and 1 constructor, and that's what I was talking about in terms of the tips and tricks in terms of assembling your team. All of your selected drivers and your selected constructors score points based on their performance. That is quite obvious. This includes sprint races, the qualifying and the races itself. Practice sessions do not count, but once again, they are very crucial in terms of giving you that information in terms of which teams and which drivers are doing the best in that racetrack. There are no restrictions on how many drivers you can pick from any one Formula 1 team, and you can make as many changes to your team as you wish. And that's why I talked about the possibility of going for Ferrari as well as Sainz and Leclerc. I've done that all season as well, and it has worked. from time to time, at least in the first 2 races, not necessarily in race weeks 3 and 4. Therefore, you can manage your team by using your subs bank and playing the various chips as described below. It is the last save version of your team each week that gets entered into all the leagues you have joined. You can pick up to 3 teams per season. That's all quite self-explanatory. Now, more on the budget. You obviously have 100 million to spend on 5 drivers and 1 constructor. As your drivers and constructors increase or decrease in price throughout the season, these price changes get reflected into your total value. So it's not like FPL where you have like a selling value, a purchase value, and you need a specific player, for example, to go up in price by 0.2 million before you can sell them on for an additional 0.1 million in value. That isn't the case here. Anything that goes up or down is reflected when you sell them and when you buy them. If one of your drivers and constructors go up in value, you can lock in that price increase by removing them from your team, so you have more budget available to spend on other drivers and constructors. As such, your budget and the budgets of your other users in F1 Fantasy may be greater than or less than 100 million. Of course, that will definitely be the case. You can have some really good value if you build your team in a specific way and you focus your transfers on getting in those informed drivers and the ones that are going up in price, and try to avoid those that are going down. Now, I actually haven't done this too much, so that's probably a mistake that I've made. Once I have more experience in F1 Fantasy, I will definitely be looking to do that at the beginning of the season. And as we'll talk about with the wildcard, one really good strategy is to actually play the wildcard, make so many substitutions, and constantly seek those price rises, and you get that increase in price reflected into your overall team value. And as you can see here, once again, the total value of your team is the sum of your team value and your remaining budget. For example, if the value of 5 drivers and 1 constructor you've selected in your team is 93 million and you have a remaining budget of 10 million, of course, the total value would be 103 million. Race week is just basically like a match day in UCL Fantasy or a game week in FPL, and includes the sprint race, if there is indeed one, like in Imola, the qualifying, and also the race itself, of course. So that's quite self-explanatory. Now, the subs banks, this is the transfers. So you can make up to 6 substitutions per week, but bear in mind, only 3 of them are free, and any additional ones you take, as I mentioned before very briefly, they cost or they incur a -10 hit. So I would highly recommend, even if you're kind of chasing the kind of team value, I would try to avoid these hits if possible. I haven't taken one so far, but I've actually made early transfers heading into Miami, which might be a mistake because you never know. One of the drivers I have might not be that good in that racetrack. That's very important as well. But I think the rest of it is quite self-explanatory. Unused substitutions do not carry forward to the following race week. So it's not like an FPL where if you decide to actually hold your transfer, you don't make one, you'll then have 2 heading into the next week, but then you can also burn one. Then we have dynamic pricing. This is a very interesting one. So as you can see highlighted right here, it's based on performances as well as transfer activity by us, the F1 Fantasy managers. You can use your subs bank to grow your budget above 100 million by adding and removing drivers and constructors. This is pretty much what has already been said in previous sections. And here we go with the chips. This is going to be the more interesting part, I guess. And this is where I'm going to be talking about kind of my feelings about the chips and who we should play it on. So the turbo driver is like the captaincy in FPL or UCL Fantasy. Whoever you captain, their points are doubled when you turbo drive them, and you cannot captain someone or turbo drive someone who costs over 20 million. So there's only 3 drivers right now who fall under that category: Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, and George Russell. Now, the rate that Charles Leclerc is going, he's probably going to fall under that category soon, and that's very unfortunate. And therefore, who would I captain after that becomes the case? Probably Sergio Perez at this moment in time, maybe Lando Norris, and also Carlos Sainz. But other than that, I wouldn't be too confident in certain drivers. It ultimately depends on how they do in the practice sessions, and if they're really good in a certain track, then I would consider it as kind of a differential captaincy. And if you're unaware of the term differential, it basically means going for something. So whether you make a transfer or you captain someone that is very low owned, or that not many people would do the exact same thing as you. So for example, turbo driving Valtteri Bottas is not something that everyone would do really if they have normal sanity. So that's kind of what I mean by that. I think the rest is quite self-explanatory. I pretty much described it there. But when we come to the mega driver though, that's when things change a little bit. So you can mega drive whoever you want. It could be Max Verstappen, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, etc. Price doesn't matter at this point. And that's where you would mega drive someone like Max Verstappen and then use your turbo driver on Charles Leclerc. You cover the 2 best drivers right now, the ones in the 2 best cars. And I think that's the way to go. Now, I don't know exactly when you should use it because ultimately it depends on the practice sessions. So once we do these deadline streams and we've seen some practice sessions, maybe that's where I can give you a better explanation of, you know what, maybe Charles Leclerc is the one to mega drive in this specific weekend, or maybe Max Verstappen. Sometimes it's kind of a 50-50 scale between these two, despite the 27-point difference in the championship. So one week it will be Charles Leclerc, the other will be Max Verstappen, and who knows, maybe the second drivers are capable of winning a race and getting those points for you, especially Sergio Perez, who has experience in winning races. Carlos Sainz hasn't won one just yet, but I think he will this season, especially if he can get that luck in order and also avoid those mistakes. But ultimately, the mega driver is the triple captaincy. So whoever you captain, their points are tripled. But unlike in FPL UCL Fantasy, you also basically get, in essence, a second captain, but those points are doubled, and they are your turbo driver. The key thing to note with the wildcard in F1 Fantasy is that you can make 12 substitutions, as opposed to an FPL, UCL Fantasy, or most of the fantasy games that I'm accustomed to, where they are unlimited transfers once you play the wildcard. So just to kind of break down the key information in this section, you get 2 wildcards per season, one in the first half and then one after the summer break. So you cannot carry your first wildcard over to the second half of the season and have 2 wildcards in your back pocket. So hopefully that makes sense. If you've got any questions about any of this, by the way, let me know down in the comment section below. I may not know all the answers, but someone else who watches these videos might be able to tell you as well, but I'll try my very best. In terms of streaks, we'll go more into that when we go to the point section very briefly. I don't want to just kind of regurgitate everything that you see here, just highlight the key information. But as we talked about earlier with Sergio Perez, he had a blue flame, and that means he has an upcoming streak. So basically, if you have 5 races in a row where you qualify in a certain position, maybe in the top 10 or the top 5, you get a blue flame. And the same goes for if you finish a race in a certain position, like George Russell in the top 5 for 5 races in a row, and that's why he has an orange flame, and it's letting you know, and you get additional points for this, as we'll talk about very soon. In terms of the leagues, it's kind of quite different to normal leaderboards, as I discussed before, where all 3 of your teams can actually be submitted into these leagues as well. But the leagues are quite self-explanatory. I've got one myself, as you saw at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen at the beginning of this video, and you'll also see it in the description below, so check that out as well. And then in terms of the lobby contains all the leagues that are currently entered by users, and you can join quite a lot of different leagues actually, and some of them have different kind of variations and permutations. Lock is basically the deadline. That is basically what it means. At the start of each qualifying session, each race week, all teams are locked and no more substitutions can be made for that specific race week. Once that lock or deadline happens, all teams for that race week become visible for all users to see in the game leaderboards. And to be honest, in terms of the updating of the leaderboards and points, it does take quite a while, and sometimes it takes until the very next day. Once I find out exactly when they make these updates, I'll let you guys know. But normally when I go on to try check my score, it does take until the very next day in order to find out which rank I'm at and how many points I scored in the end. Looking at the replacement driver section, this won't be too common, but it has happened already in this season. So Sebastian Vettel wasn't able to feature in the first 2 races of this season, and he was replaced by fellow German Nico Hülkenberg. So once a specific driver isn't able to feature in a race week, he is automatically replaced by the one who's filling in for him. So if you had Sebastian Vettel to start the season, he would have been replaced by Nico Hülkenberg automatically without the need to use a free transfer basically. And then you can see the rest in terms of postponed and cancelled sessions. That's quite self-explanatory and easy. The same goes for the others section, where it also talks about the penalties. It takes up to 24 hours for the penalties that have been incurred for specific drivers and maybe even teams, and be updated in F1 Fantasy. But that's all the game rules pretty much broken down. I will put a link to this in the description below so you can read them yourself. I'd highly recommend it if you're new to the game. Now I'm going to show you the point section very quickly and also discuss why I think certain drivers and teams are the best ones to choose from due to the actual point scoring system and how they can actually benefit you and get you the most points possible. I'll go through the point scoring system very quickly, but I will also put a link in the description below. So if you finish Q1, you will get 1 point, 2 for Q2, and 3 for Q3. Very easy to remember. You want to target these drivers that are very consistent in qualifying and also the races, of course, where you gain more points. But for example, in qualifying, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Valtteri Bottas, Carlos Sainz, Sergio Perez right now, they look like 5 of the best. Fernando Alonso's another one. It's just he doesn't really get the points in the actual race because of bad luck and different circumstances. But that is kind of the best drivers for qualifying right now this season. If you beat your teammate, you gain 2 points in qualifying. And the same goes for the race, although you get 3, as we'll discuss very soon. But you do not lose points for being out-qualified by your teammate. The same goes for being out-raced. Not classifying in qualifying, you lose -5, and disqualification is -10, although that's quite rare. Moving on to the qualifying position bonuses, you get 10 points for first place. You only get 1 for 10th place, but that's quite easy to remember. So basically, from 10th you get 1 point, and for each position higher than 10th, you gain an extra point that way. So it's quite similar to the old point scoring system that we used to have for the actual races, where 10 points is for a race victory. And now for the actual race, if you classify, if you finish it, you gain a point. If you actually gain a position, so for each position gained, you gain 2 points, but there's a cap of 10 points, so you cannot gain more than 10 points from the amount of positions you win. And then if you beat your teammate, you get 3 points, as I discussed earlier. If you win the fastest lap, 5 points. And this season it mainly looks like the likes of Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz will win those. For example, let's say Charles Leclerc is on for the fastest lap. They may, at Red Bull, pit Sergio Perez on soft tyres, and then he's going to try to mitigate that and win the fastest lap, because you gain an extra point in the championship for winning the fastest lap as well. So those 4 drivers are the main ones to look out for in terms of the fastest lap points. And in terms of the positions lost, it's the same thing as if you gain it. So 2 points for every position gained, but there's a cap of 10 points, and the same goes for if you lose it. So -10 points is the maximum you can lose from that. If you do not classify or finish a race, you lose -10, and disqualification means -20. Once again, that's quite rare, but it does happen from time to time. In terms of race position bonuses, very easy to remember. It's the exact same scoring system as it is in F1. So the winner gets 25 points, second place 18, and third place 15. So that's all quite easy to remember. 10th place, of course, gets 1 point. And then looking at the streaks, this is what I talked about before. So this is for 5 races in a row. So for example, driver qualifying. If driver qualifies in the top 10 for 5 qualifying sessions in a row, they gain 5 points. Sergio Perez is on a blue flame. He is 1 there. Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, even Carlos Sainz as well, despite him not being able to feature in Q3 last time out in Imola. And then driver race. If a driver finishes in the top 10 for 5 races in a row, you get 10 points. Obviously, the races is always more important than qualifying, so double the amount of points compared to these two. And then constructor qualifying as well. If both drivers qualify in the top 10 for 3 qualifying sessions in a row, you gain 5 points. So Ferrari and Red Bull are by far the best for this. I'm not sure if I'd be able to trust McLaren, even with Lando Norris, because Daniel Ricciardo can sometimes be out of the top 10, whether it's for race finishes or for qualifying. I think Lando Norris is by far the more consistent, and also the car seems better suited to him. And the same goes for the race. So if both drivers finish in the top 10 for 3 races in a row, they get 10 points. So very easy to remember that. The streaks are very important. You basically want the more consistent drivers at the top end teams. And in terms of constructors, do not go for random teams. Even Alfa Romeo, despite how good Valtteri Bottas has been, you want a constructor with 2 reliable drivers who consistently finish in the top 10 and also qualify in one of those positions. Then you have the sprint race. If you classify, you gain 1 point, just like with qualifying in the races. Per position gained, you get 1 point. The maximum is 5, so it's kind of halved from the normal system. And then beat teammate, you get 2 points. Fastest lap is 3 points. And then per position lost, the same kind of thing there. Not classifying is -5 points. And disqualification is -10. So the exact same as the qualifying sessions there. And that's pretty much it. You've got the sprint position bonuses. So first place gets 10 points. Kind of the same thing there. We've discussed this already. So check out this rule section. Is very, very important, and the point scoring, just in case you have any doubts. And then at the very bottom, as I discussed earlier, a normal race weekend, you will have qualifying on the Saturday, and that's when the lock or the deadline kicks in. And on a sprint weekend, the qualifying's on the Friday, and that's when the deadline would be. So just be aware of that. The race will always be on the Sunday, but sometimes the qualifying will be on the Friday, depending on if it's a sprint race weekend or not. But thank you very much for watching this video. Hopefully it's been helpful. If you've got any more questions, let me know down in the comment section below, and which type of content you want to see regarding F1 fantasy, and also on this channel, especially when football is over in around a month's time or so. There could be gaming videos and streams if you want to see that, and hopefully you've enjoyed this. Hit the notification bell if you want to see more streams and more videos and be notified whenever I upload or I'm about to do a stream. And be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. It really helps out the channel in the algorithm. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM. Thank you very much to everyone who's already done so. The same for the channel members and also the Patreons. It really goes a long way to building this channel and going to new heights and reaching new goals. We're trying to get to 11,000 subscribers, so any sort of support would be massively appreciated. All the best of luck for race week 5 in F1 Fantasy. I'm almost losing count with these. And match day 12 in UCL Fantasy is plenty more content. We've obviously got the Champions League on Tuesday. There'll be a deadline stream there. There's going to be a deadline stream tomorrow in football, for FPL. So it's absolute madness, the amount of content that's going on at the moment. But this should cover the kind of void we'll have for football during the summer. So thank you very much. There's going to be a team selection for F1 Fantasy very soon, as well as a deadline stream if possible. I'll let you guys know if something changes. But take care, enjoy the F1 and the racing, and I'll see you next time.